Right, so we're rolling. I don't know how to edit this bit though on the phone. So
we just have to wade in.
This is it counts again. This always counts.
You're committed now.
Welcome to the Living La Vita Loca podcast. What episode is it? 13, 12, 14? Around there.
13.
Thank you. Yeah. Lucky 13. So, hi. You alright, guys? I'm Faz.
I'm Rich, and I remembered to say my own name that time.
You did. That is awesome. I'm proud of you. Super proud. So, we are back from our festival escapades, and we're still here in, I'd say, soul rather than body. It's been a rough week for one reason or another, but mostly not festival related. I want to make a couple of apologies at the start of this. I want to apologise to Flogging Molly for confusing them with Gogo Bordello when I was really pissed. I want to apologise, not to Liam, but to the podcast for asking Liam about 17 times why Billy Talent. I don't know why I was so insistent on that being a question. You're allowed to like Billy Talent, and that's fine. I don't know why I was so like, well, why are you seeing Billy Talent? Like, it's in a lot of times. There was no reason for it. So, sorry to Billy Talent, really. Yeah, Mr. Talent.
For what it's worth, a personal highlight.
Well, there we go,
The Billy Talent set. It was good.
I was led to believe that would be the case, and I still kept on going, well, why are you going to see them? Like, there was no reason to keep asking that question. I was just drunk. And I guess this is an apology on behalf of Steve, one of the guests. I'm not trying to bring something up here and embarrass Steve at all, but at one point he referred to Siphon Filter as being a PS2 game, and my word, that isn't what. Drop the ball there, Steve. Come on now. We can play them on PlayStation 2, and I probably will, but they are firmly PS1 games. At least the best ones are. I think 1 and 2 definitely are PS1 games. Is 3 a PS1 game? I think it is.
That's a question, isn't it? I think maybe so, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, we'll look that up at some point after the pod and just not tell anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Look it up yourselves.
Yeah. Google is a thing. I hear it's great.
And lastly, so the last apology I wanted to make really was for lying. I lied in the pod, but without knowing it, because at one point I said that I was excited to play Parappa The Rapper, and I lied about that. I posthumously have lied about that. So, yeah, there's a reason we'll talk about that.
We'll get to it.
So, speaking of which, we're going to be reviewing or looking into Parappa The Rapper, the PSP. It was a 10th anniversary port, so it wasn't necessarily a remaster. It did have a couple of things.
The PSP version was 10 years on from the PS. Good grief, I feel old.
I know. So does Parappa, so it was a remaster, and in a way, because there was added features to it. But in terms of core gameplay, there wasn't necessarily. But we'll get into that. And Rich, what were you looking at?
I am looking at the Atari Flashback Classics collection on the PS Vita. And again, like, kind of depending on how you want to define it, sits in a weird hole somewhere between
don't we all
between port and remaster, I guess.
Okay.
So that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, so that got us thinking. And the major question we're going to try and answer a little bit. What are we answering? No,
I was just asking. Are we going to answer?
No, we're posing a question this week on the pod, and that is just: why are there so many remakes now? Why are there so many remastered games? Why would you remaster or remake a game that was a masterpiece in its own right, say 25 years ago? So we're going to talk about the games, and then that'll help us, I guess, think about that question, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Yeah,
cool.
Works for me.
Awesome. Do you want to crack on with Atari and the 150 games that come with it, which is awesome?
So 150 games is easily the biggest collection of anything that I've ever tried to play, probably ever.
Yeah.
So the good news is that I did manage to get around to trying all of them. The bad news is I didn't try any of them for very long. So my reviews are generally not that in depth. This one is going to be even shallower. So it's basically a collection of Atari arcade games, 2600 games, and 5200 games. So that's a couple of Atari consoles and the arcade bits. And it very quickly dawned on me that I would need a way to get into this. So, forever trying to push the medium where I can. My review is in spreadsheet form.
It feels like it probably needs to be.
Yeah. So I've got one word review for 150 games.
This is great. I'm so excited about this.
Now, you have a choice at this point.
How many words do you get in a tweet? Oh, is that characters, isn't it?
That is characters.
Oh, right,
yeah.
okay.
You'd need a thread for this.
Yeah.
So I could read all of them out, but I we've only got so much time on this earth, and
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe a little picture or a scan for social media or something. If anybody wants the full fat version,
That'd be great.
But I've color coded it.
You are a wonderful human being, Mitch.
The problem is that because the main reason I did this was that I thought it would be handy to get a sense of the kind of divide between the arcade games, the 2600 games, and the 5200 games, and highlight some points that I wanted to make sure that I covered. The problem is that because the collection has so many 2600 games, the font on my spreadsheet is fucking small. So I can barely read it.
I can attest to that, yeah.
It is very small, but it's all there. So there's 150 games on the collection, and 102 of them are from this 2600. So you've got some of the classics on here, right, from the arcade. So like Asteroids, Breakout, and Centipede, all make an appearance. Tempest, Warlords. If you've been anywhere near an arcade or you're kind of vaguely familiar with Atari, like they are some of the heavy hitters. It's worth noting how many times those names pop up. So like you will have multiple versions and variations of the same thing. So being told you've got 150 games on it feels like a bit of a swizz. It also feels like me complaining about it is really churlish. Like, it's ridiculous.
Can I ask at this point?
Yeah.
How much is this game worth? How much do you pay for it? And how much is it worth now? Because I feel like is it quite...
So, that's
value.
kind of an interesting point. So, I got it digitally, and I paid, I think it was £15 or £16.
Okay.
For the set. So, I mean, it's coming out as pennies per game.
It's like 10p a game, yeah.
Yeah. The reason that's kind of a head turner is that if you bought the Atari Flashback Classics on the PS4, I think you have to get it across different volumes. Wow. I should have double checked that before I came on, but certainly, like, if you bought it physically, you could get like one PS Vita cartridge with them all on. Now, admittedly, that was like a limited run exclusive type thing. Yeah. So, if you didn't get it when it was being published and printed originally, it's, premium now. So you'd have to adjust that accordingly. I don't know off the top of my head if that was the case with the PS4 physicals, but certainly it was split into a couple of, or a few volumes. So straight off the bat, like, sure, there's a lot of repetition, but actually it kind of feels like good value.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting about this for me personally was that I've been mucking about with like the Evercade, the handheld that, they make a point of putting these retro collections together and give you a little manual and stuff. And I got a couple of Atari cartridges because I thought, you know what, like, I'm familiar with the name. I know some of the games, but I've never really like educated myself on what the Atari thing, again, air quotes, was. And so what was kind of interesting about this collection was that I kind of actively avoided the 2600 stuff to date because, it's very old school. It's the sort of thing where like a box will represent you in a room made of a box, picking up boxes and moving boxes and things like that. and that's you going on a big grand adventure and slaying a dragon or something.
To be honest, that sounds like a really good representation of what my life generally is. Box in a box.
I can't divorce that mental image from this game now. Thank you. So the Grand Adventures of Faz, it kind of the 2600 stuff as a whole was easily the big surprise. Not least because of the sheer number of games that it covered, but also like because it was out for so long. You see how people got to grips with the technology and started using it in different ways. And the graphics for some of the games would be so simple. And then you fast forward however many years and, it would be a genuinely impressive thing to look at. So as a way of learning a little bit more about their output, it was really, really good.
Yeah.
I appreciate it for that. Where it kind of fell over for me was if we're looking at, remakes and remasters and ports and stuff like that, it would be the kind of quote unquote remastering bit. Okay. So one of the bits in the blurb when you're buying the game makes a point of saying about how, it's integrating the PS Vita's unique controls to, let you play the game in a whole new way. That's touchscreen stuff, and 2 analog sticks. Some of the 2600 games, they're the ones that you have to, on the box, right? They would have said, includes 10 games. That's 10 variations of, the same thing. And you'd have to flick through the buttons on the console to switch between them. On this, you get an overlay that replicates the console, and you can flick the buttons either by pressing, say, triangle or by pressing the touch screen, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And some of the games that default to multiplayer, you can play on one Vita. And, it'll be laid out in such a way that one of you could have the left analog stick, one of you could have the right. You've each got a fire button, off you pop. So actually, for experiencing some of those multiplayer games in person, great. Yeah. That's a really clever idea. You can play online for some of them as well. I mean, I didn't try it, but you can. Where it falls down is when you introduce the games that had a slightly different or quirkier control system. So some of the arcade games might have used a trackball or like a paddle.
Okay. Yeah,
some of the console games used a little twiddly paddle as well. The 5200 games use like have a keypad on the joysticks and stuff like that. And those keypads and those keys get overlaid on the screen, but they're really small. They're really hard to hit, and you're not entirely sure if they're actually doing anything some of the time.
Why is my box in a box not doing the boxing that I've asked into box?
Basically, yeah. Or like some of the paddle games, like if you're trying to steer a car around a race course or something like that, if you're using the analog stick, it'll move violently quick. Yeah. Like it will just be like you've slapped it and you're letting it spin like freewheeling and it's just going all over the place. Yet if you use the D-pad, you can control it a bit nicer, it's a bit smoother, or you can use the touch screen and occasionally get it right. So it gives you options, which is good, but they're not all great.
It's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of retro games that were designed with just having, say, I don't know, an arcade stick or having a D-pad, like, and you try and use an analog stick nowadays, and they've ported it or remastered it, and we'll get onto what that means soon. But and then you use that analog stick, and it just freaks out. It just happens very often, doesn't it? Because it's almost like they've been like, well, we will make it available to be able to do this, but actually, it makes it really hard and shit.
Yeah. What was really weird with the way they've implemented the controls is that when you're using the D-pad, it feels more analog than when you're using the analog stick.
Yeah.
When you're using the analog stick, it felt more digital. It was like it was all or nothing and there was no middle bit. So I ended up, say, with Breakout and stuff like that, playing that more with the D-pad than the stick, even though, you might naturally gravitate more towards the other one. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a bit of a weird one. But I don't think you can sniff at the content. No. Really, like there is just so much.
I see your list. I see the amount of words you've written.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, some of them are genuinely, and I do mean genuinely impressive for the kit they were running on. And I've got some new favourites in there. You know, the kind of adventure one that I was talking about, called Adventure, by the way.
Why would you stray away from the word adventure?
Well, it was the era where you could use it, and nobody had used it yet. You know,
what other word do people use instead of adventure? Though, like it's such it's probably the most worn word.
It had a sequel that's on here too. Adventure 2. So
Adventure squared.
Yeah. Quest would be another word.
Yes, that's true.
There? I don't think there was a quest on here, but I think there was like variations on a theme. I think is fair to say. Some of the games further down, you've got a lot of sports games, and you need the manuals to play them. Like there were a couple that I started trying to play, namely the baseball ones, of which there must have been about maybe 4 or 5, or the American football ones, where, I either could barely start the game, or in some cases couldn't even start at all because I couldn't work out how to, say, throw a pitch in the baseball game. And then you check the manual, which is, included in the collection. You can go and find the digital manual and stuff like that. Thank fuck, because otherwise, there's no way you're getting anywhere.
They probably sensed that though, didn't they?
I think they possibly did.
We definitely have to put an instruction into this. Like it was almost like you were trying to type a code into MS-DOS just to get the game going.
Basically. And I mean, in fact, I think one of the baseball games, it's not like you would think I press this button and I pitch the ball. It's like, no, you've got to hold down on the stick, press the button, and then push up. And, it's those sorts of things where like the kind of, older than old school game design starts to come through, where it's like, everybody is getting to grips with what this thing can do, and how to make these actions happen. So I mean, there's more than one, football game, like soccer football game, which is its official title. But it's almost more like table football, where like all of your entire team is moving at once and stuff like that. So there's a couple of quirks, but then there's other ones like the what was it? Was it Haunted House? Something like that? Yeah. Where like the atmosphere, considering you are a box in a darkened space, and I think in one of them all you can see your eyes just looking around, trying to navigate this maze and not get got by stuff. Like the atmosphere is incredible. Like it's genuinely impressive stuff. Or like what was it? Oh, Radar Lock. My one word review for that was just fuck. Because like it's arcade flight combat on a fucking 2600.
Awesome. I had to work out what kind of fuck that was.
Oh, that was good fuck.
It was a good fuck, yeah.
That was good fuck. You can tell because it's all caps with an exclamation mark. Whereas, like, some of them...
just like, you start laughing, just like, as in like, it's been a good fuck when it's got...
when it's all caps. Some of the ones further on are just like... Well, the 5200 games in general were a bit of a disappointment. I think is fair to say, looking at this. There's a lot of repetition from before. There's, underwhelmings in here, slippery controls, stuck, non-starter, for some of the sports games. I think because they had more buttons on the keypad, it's more things that can go wrong, more things to get lost with when you're trying to understand it as a player in 2023, going back to these things who has a limited willingness to trawl through manuals.
Yeah. And you can see there, I can see from this extensive spreadsheet that made up 10% of the collection, and therefore maybe they thought that as well themselves and thought, we're throwing this in and it's probably going to be shit, but...
Yeah, it does feel a little bit more like it's a kind of a bonus novelty kind of thing rather than the main event. The main event definitely feels like the 2600 games. And some of the arcade stuff is interesting, but Black Widow is basically a twin-stick shooter. Like on old Atari gear. Again, genuinely impressive. I wasn't expecting to see that. I was expecting, a stick and one button at most, if not just a trackpad, or, simple controls. And admittedly, twin stick controls are, by 2023 standards, simple, but, for the time, you've got to appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, like it's I'm the more I'm looking at my spreadsheet, the more impressed with the collection I am, almost as an educational tool, which sounds utterly ridiculous.
No, but it is though. I mean, it's like, so I don't know, apart from even just the names, I guess, really, and probably, you know, if you said to me 5 names of the games for Atari, like the best selling ever, I'd probably know them, and I'd probably played 3 of them. Like, for example, like it's just because it's the era before us.
Yeah.
Even though I may have like dabbled in a couple of sort of, you know, of those types of consoles like Commodore and things like that, like to have that as all together in one. It, like you say, it's like going to a museum of Atari and going, oh, right, here, try it all and see. And actually, you'll find that some of it will stick and still be really, really good now. And actually, you'll be impressed by it, even, you know, and you might want to learn more about it. And that's where I like reading like Retro Gamer, for example, because then you kind of go, well, actually, and you think about how many of these games have people poured their heart and soul into developing and programming, and they're all there for the £15-16 that you said you paid for it. It's just it's stunning, really.
It's ridiculous. It is, and like I know one of the more recent collections made a point of contextualizing it, and so like there might not be as many games on there, but you can play them from like a timeline of Atari history, and it will go through, you know, the events happening at the time. There'll be developer interviews and things like that. And I think some bright spark looked at this collection and basically had the same revelation that I did. It was like, actually, this is almost a learning tool, because these are the foundational building blocks of the entire like industry. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that.
No.
And so to see them, you know, in this way, in this light, is genuinely fascinating. Don't get me wrong, they're not all great games. You know, they're not. Obviously they're not. There's 150 of the fuckers. How can they all be great? But, you know, like there was one bit where I was starting to say like, oh, you know, I know there was some like early experiments with like licensed games. There's no like Star Wars or anything like that on here. And then I went on, I found a little run of games that was like Star Strike, that's the trench run from A New Hope. Sword Fight, they're using lightsabers, you know, and it's things like that. And it's like, like you can still see the component parts like coming together. So yeah, like it's interesting, and is it something that I'm going to go back to, you know, constantly? No, probably not. Like I said, I've got the collection on the Evercade that I feel controls a bit more consistently, and certainly the games that I'm most likely to play have all kind of ended up that way anyway.
So can I ask about that collection then? How much did you pay for that one?
So I think they came in at about 17 quid, 18 quid, maybe a little less.
Yeah.
But
and do you still feel that's good value then for, obviously you get less games, but you said it felt better to play on the Evercade, I guess?
Yeah, I do think it's good value for money, because like you get a little manual with it, but they also do a little bit to contextualize it. You get a little bit of blurb. It's not much. It's a couple of paragraphs, but it's still, you know, something.
Yeah. Again, it's just like a history lesson almost in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
I feel like what I'm trying to get at there is that, and probably what emanates through this podcast, is that you are the true historian from the podcast. You will go and get the Evercade, you'll go and get the official thing, and you go get the thing, and it's worth having, and you will say whether or not, and you'll always be honest about it and say this is worth having or not worth having. Whereas I go to China and buy a £80 Droix emulator, and I'll play it on a terrible little console and be like, well, I've had the experience as well too, and I've done this and done that, and actually it's not the same at all. And it's almost like, is there a difference to be able to do that and to play it how the makers probably intended it to be played in a way, in a handheld context anyway? I
think, I mean, that's definitely something we'll get into a little bit later on. But yeah, like there's definitely a kind of emulation versus not. And admittedly, both of these collections are emulating it. Like I don't have original Atari kit to go and see how they play.
Actually, now that you say that, but then it's been officially emulated rather than...
Yeah.
But then people always say, you see in like, you know, magazines and stuff and online, like, oh, this PS3 emulation for the PC is great, and almost like even if it's like just a homebrew, everyone plays it, and it's almost like becomes the industry standard. And what makes it official or not official, and what makes it good or bad?
I think some emulators ended up being, licensed by manufacturers and then used in projects like these.
Which is crazy, isn't it?
Which is crazy. And I think there's been, this is me talking off the top of my head, so, by extension, could be talking out my arse.
Yeah, we never do that.
No. But I think there have been times when, game developers and publishers have got in trouble for using bits of emulators that perhaps they shouldn't have, and things like that. But yeah, like for, say, the Sega Saturn, right? Like that is notoriously tricky to emulate. And so therefore, like I did buy a Saturn because I wanted to play some of the games. The more I dabbled with emulating, the more I was like, I would like to play them properly, thank you. And so that seemed like the best way to go. But for the Atari stuff, like the emulation, because of the age of the games and things like that, seems relatively solid. Certainly, from the ones that I have played, say, at Arcade Club and stuff like that, it seems pretty consistent from memory. Certainly, like everything performed as it should. I managed to get the PS Vita thing to crash once, I think. I don't know why, but it did. I think the reason that I would go for, say, the Evercade over this is that you have save states and stuff like that, which, granted, because of the age of the games, are not vital. They're just kind of handy to have. You're not going to need to save state your way through a fucking game of Pong, right? But for...
Au contraire.
But seriously, though, like if you got, say, a high score or something like that, you might want to get a quick save state just to, it's that sort of thing where it's just kind of nice to have the option. I think, if anything, this made me think that maybe going for the collection on the PS4 with the developer interviews, with the timeline, with the context, like it's suddenly looking like a bit more of an appealing purchase, not least because they took the opportunity to also add in, a couple of remakes and things like that. I mean, one of the games on this collection was 2005, which is insane. Wow. One of the 2600 games was 2005.
That's so cool. I didn't know that. So I didn't know they had them still getting pumped out then. It was in whatever fashion emulation it was.
Yeah, it was a sequel to one of the other ones from back in the day. And there, again, on the collection, there's a couple of unreleased prototypes that they've kind of polished up a little bit and popped on there. And so there's a couple of really interesting bits on here. And I say interesting rather than imminently playable and great. They're not great games.
Good to look at. If you love video games.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure 3 or 4 of the people that listen to this podcast do in the same fashion that you do. It's nice that people, it's great. Look, we'll get to another podcast in the future where we're at each other's throats and saying, "Oh, this is shit," and I disagree with you. But right now, I'm so impressed with you. I'm so impressed with your spreadsheet. It is inspirational to see that kind of work going into a fucking amateur podcast that you are hosting. I mean, it just looks great, and it's wonderful that you've done that. So thank you for doing that, because I really appreciate it.
It's
the fact
all right,
that you went into every game and you've done that. It's awesome.
I mean, if you squint, you can see the holes a little bit. So I mean, I do.
Wait a minute.
I invent a couple of words. So Space Duel is basically a multiplayer version of Asteroids. I was like, how am I going to sum that up in one word? So I've gone with Multiplasteroids. Stunt Cycle was a prototype, and I've just gone with Proto Shite.
Bad review.
It wasn't great.
Not doing well on the scale of 10.
Asteroids on the 5200, I've just got 4th. It's the 4th version of Asteroids that I've gone through.
It's a good game though. It's consistently, you know what's going to happen, and it's not good for you.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if anything, the having the variations on a game like that, at least you can see the differences in the hardware.
Yeah, okay, fair
enough. Which, I know it's something of a redundant point, but, nowadays it's increasingly difficult to actually spot meaningful differences between consoles. Whereas at least here, you can see the different hardware at work. So that there is something to it for that. So, I mean, arbitrary scores out of 10.
This is going to be difficult.
It is, because after I'd finished game 150 and all that, I was ready to give it a 6 out of 10. It's fun, it's interesting. Is it life-changing? No. Is it something I'm going to go back to regularly? Probably not. But the more I talk about it, the more I appreciate that kind of like history angle and that kind of museum vibe. So I am tempted to give it a 7, but I don't think I am, just because of like as a game and as a collection of games, it feels like, you know, there's some fat there that could have been trimmed off. There's a bit more polish that could have been given to the new bits and the kind of remastering. But it is fun. And like this is the highest recommendation for a 6 out of 10 that I could give.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, we talked about last week that, you know, there's no such bad thing as a 6 or 7
No,
game
absolutely.
if you think it's worth having. So, yeah, I mean, you know, as effusive as I was about you reviewing it and things like that, I probably won't go and dabble in it because I feel like I've had enough from you. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I need to go.
I've done quite enough.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Atari Man. There's got to be a Mr. Atari Man out on.
I'm pretty sure he exists somewhere.
Is it Guitaroo Man, Atari Man? Like, so cool. Thank you for that. And I'm going to be as, you know, again, as basic as I always am. I just kind of go for one game that has six levels.
No ambition.
Oh, I had an ambition to finish this game, and it was crushed under the asteroids. Oh dear, Parappa the Rapper, why you hate me, man? Like, so I guess Parappa the Rapper, then it was out. I think it was in 97, 98. I think 98, and then there was a PSP. Like I said at the start, kind of a bit of a remaster. Wasn't so much a reimagining in so much that the levels are still the same and the gameplay is still the same, but I think they just add a couple of bits on where there's a couple of bits of multiplayer. You can download some new songs and you can game share. Those kind of PSP, Sony sort of things that we're dabbling with, where it's like, oh, this is what makes it a bit different, and actually there's PSP worth having if you want to game share with a friend. Or you can do the multiplayer games online. So again, because of the fact that the PSP is dead everywhere, that nobody's on there. But I had a look, and there was no one there. I mean, if there was going to be a person playing multiplayer Parappa the Rapper in 2023, I would have immediately hunted this person down and shook their hand so hard.
I just imagine it would be like the knight at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Just him, the Holy Grail, and Parappa the Rapper on his PSP.
But he would be saying to me, "You chose poorly." to come back to this game.
As your face melted.
Yeah, it felt like it was going to melt at some point. So, it's so weird because when you go on Parappa the Rapper, if you listen to this pod and you think, I remember it and I had a great time, what are you talking about? Why are you moaning already? The concept of the game is great. Like the idea of I guess the storyline, it's batshit crazy. It's like BoJack Horseman on if you then, I don't know, like smashed up essence of BoJack Horseman, and then BoJack Horseman sniffed that essence, that is in, and a bunch of cocaine as well. That is in. It would be. It's that. It's, you know, like, so it starts off with Parappa the Rapper. Like, he basically wants to be a hero to beat up some bullies, so he goes to an onion kung fu master who challenges him to a rap.
Yep.
And that's the start of the game. And they're all random animals, and the girl he likes is a sunflower of kinds. I think, is it Daisy? I can't remember now. And yeah, it's just so weird. And then, so I remember thinking, I've had this game before, like for the PSP, and I remember thinking it's quite hard. It's quite a hard game. I remember that. I'm gonna go back on what I've said. I'm gonna try it on easy, just because there's easy and normal. They're the only modes available to you.
Right.
And I thought I'm gonna try it easy first because I've got prior knowledge that I remember it being really difficult. So I go on easy mode, and you do your rap, and the rap is that you get quite a funky song. Kick, punch, it all in the mind, and that's the funky song, if you didn't know. And you basically just copy the buttons of your teacher. So the first person being the Kung Fu Master Onion, the second being the cow who is a driving instructor.
Oh, yeah.
And then the third one is a Rastafarian frog who owns a thrift shop.
Oh, is that at the market or something?
Yeah. So, and on easy mode, I passed each of these levels first time. And then the game goes, right, now try normal mode. So you can't complete the game on easy mode.
Oh, one of those.
So, which you understand when you remember or you learn that there are only 6 levels, which I knew was the case anyway.
Yeah.
So I get why they were like, okay, well, we can't just let you finish it 6 levels in 15 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't what the insanity of that game? Like, the replayability on easy mode, if you finish each of the levels first time, I get that. And therefore, I was a bit like, well, maybe they could have just made the easy mode a little bit harder. Do you know what I mean? Or made that normal mode and made hard mode, or, try to level out the difficulty. And I'm saying that retroactively because when you go on normal mode, it's so hard. It's the hardest game I have ever played.
Oh, God.
I might say that, and obviously there'll be like probably harder games, but it's just so difficult. Like there's no way of knowing how you are doing it correctly. There's a score,
right,
and there's a scoring. So you get a actual a numerical score, right. And there is a set of basically that you've got. I think there's cool. You can rap cool. You can rap good. You can rap bad, or you can rap awful. And if you fail on awful, then you fail the song, and you've got to restart the song.
Right.
So fair enough. That's fine. But if you miss any of the square, L with L, etc. You matching the buttons with the button bashing. If you miss them, fair enough, you understand you're going to drop down. But if you feel like you're hitting them in time with the way that it's telling you that should be the case, like, I'm pressing at the time that's flashed up on the screen, then you think, oh, fair enough, I'm close enough to that to be maintaining a level and scoring. But no, that doesn't happen. Like, you just start falling down the scale and failing the song. And you're like, well, what? I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Can you please help me somehow, anywhere in a manual or something, to tell me how you're meant to actually complete this game?
This thing. Yeah,
mechanically.
I tell you what, I'm thinking of two things, right? I'm thinking of like Guitar Hero, and I'm thinking of Dance Dance Revolution.
Yeah, okay.
Because both of those, you're matching buttons on that kind of scrolling track, but both of them, you kind of get that immediate, like, good timing, bad timing, awful timing.
You, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's that very immediate feedback that, like, oh, well, if you just pressed it a moment earlier, you'd be doing better. So there's like none of that.
No
right?
feedback whatsoever.
Shit.
No feedback. The only feedback you kind of get is the fact that you see your numerical score changing,
right?
And it goes from 0 upwards, and it can come back down to 0. But it doesn't tell you how that score is accounted for. So you might get 3, then you might get 7, and then you might end up at 21, and then you end up back at 0 straight away. And it's almost like, what? I mean, there was even points where I swear I pressed the wrong button, and it was like, oh, you're rapping good. And I'm like, what? Not once did rapping cool ever come up as an option. There was no way that, and I was like, okay, so I'm obviously not very good at this game, maybe. Like, and then, so I thought, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look it up and see what I should be doing. There must be, over the last 25 years or whatever, that, so how to do Parappa the Rapper, or people have learned how to do Parappa the Rapper. Now, it seems it is a little bit different in the PS4 remaster that came out in 2017, which is a 20th anniversary thing. And it seems to be, I think, and you asked me this question, is it a little bit easier? And I think it is, apart from level 4. I can't remember which level that is, but
I never got that far
because I've not fucking been there. But I remember doing it on PS1 and getting to I got to level 6 on PS1.
Really?
So I feel like the port, and not letting any cats out the bag here, but this is an emulation that I've got. This isn't actually the UMD,
right?
But I have had the UMD, and I remember it being just as hard on PSP. Okay. I feel like it was almost harder on the PSP, and and it might be that the port or the emulation I've got off. It might be a bad emulation. And now I'm going to say this: a bad workman blames his tools, but sometimes the tools are made of jelly and lies. So it might be that this is a lying jelly tool.
Yeah. So I mean, like, could it have just been a lousy porting job? Full stop. Originally,
maybe.
Yeah.
Because I genuinely do remember playing this game, and I remember thinking at the time I bought it for about £25 as a UMD on PSP, and still struggling. You know, in my heyday, like 2008,
quicker reflexes.
I was definitely on the ball then.
You got to believe that.
I did believe for a while. But I remember then, I don't think I got past level 2. I think I really struggled. And it's really frustrating when you kind of get towards... Because it lets you continue on bad or awful if you don't completely flunk the level.
Right.
But you can get right to the end of the level and it can say, you gotta do it again. And you're like... And you're like, oh, and then Parappa says it, and in my mind, I'm saying the same thing. What? And I'm like, oh, you're so right, Parappa. Yeah, what? That, like, I mean,
what indeed?
Because if the difficulty level's so hard, and you've got those 4 types of difficulty in terms of what you can pass on, you can only pass on good, but you spend most of the game in bad. And then you look on the internet, and people are like, yeah, it's terrible, it's really, really hard. Parappa the Rapper is notoriously hard. All right, so then I look up YouTube videos. How do you do Parappa the Rapper? Or sometimes I'll say to you, or maybe try and press it a little bit beforehand, or, like as in, try and go on the rhythm of the music, don't look at the buttons. Close your eyes and learn it. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Be a better musician.
Yeah. And I'm like, so then, I was like, have I just tricked into some weird fucking world where I've got to sense and feel what Parappa senses and feels? Like, I don't understand. Like
it's a role-playing game?
Yeah. I'm back being a box in a box again. And I'm just like, so I still tried, genuinely did try, kind of think, right, well, I'll try and go with the rhythm. And there is something to that where you're thinking, if you hear the song 20 times over, you're hitting the beat and stuff, and you don't need to necessarily, I was like, totally zoned in, just looking at the bar at the top where the beat would come up, and then you get the buttons and the actual matching of your buttons, and I ignored the score and I ignored the ranking system, and that did kind of help. That is but that's level 1. I assume there's a difficulty level step up in terms of because I can't do level 2. Yeah. I have tried 55 times to do level 2. Because I insisted on counting, because I thought, well, actually, I'm going to, just because I know it's going to be notoriously difficult, and I want to see how many times I'm going to try this before I lose my mind. And that was where I got to. That was my limit, apparently. Before I was like, right, no more. It wasn't a lot of time, but it felt like enough time trying to do it. So yeah, I just don't know how to do this game. And I'm hoping that it is just a bad port, because it sounds like people were having more success with the PS4 remaster, which is 10 years later, and maybe they thought, maybe they ported it better, or maybe they remastered it better, or maybe they thought that actually they needed to make it a bit easier.
Yeah,
I get why they've got a difficulty level, because they've only got 6 levels in there. Now, I believe that Parappa The Rapper 2, for example, Jammy Lammy, are still notoriously difficult as well. But I think they've got more content, but they're still really difficult. So I don't think the developer necessarily learned that lesson and just went, actually, well, if you're not good at it, fuck you. And like I say, there must have been a point in my life where, even when I was a child, I remember getting to the 6th. I don't think I ever completed it. I think I got to the 6th level, but I don't think I ever got past the 6th level. Because I remember in the last verse of the last level, I swear it makes you go like maybe a cappella or something like that. Where you kind of got, I think that you lose sight of what buttons you should be pressing, and it's the repeat of the previous verse. So then you've got to just time it with the music. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
As a development of the game, and that's kind of cool. But I remember that was too much for me when I was 10, almost 10. You know what I mean? Like, as you know, I maybe played it when I was like 12 or something, but. Yeah, so that would have been too much for me. But it seems that I can't even do a simple button beat game. Now, that isn't like... maybe not a simple one, I don't know. But man, oh man, Parappa the Rapper. Like, I don't know what he's taken a Horcrux off me this week. It really has. Like, there's not many left now.
I do genuinely like wonder, because I know like with ports and remakes and emulation, blah 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 blah. Like it can sometimes be quite easy for, you know, when you're running like older games and things like that, for timing to be thrown out of whack. Or, you know, I remember in fact, it wasn't even like a remake or a port or anything like that, but I was trying to play Saints Row 4 on a computer that was underpowered once upon a time, and I couldn't complete a bit of the tutorial because the thing I was on wouldn't move quick enough to get past a closing gate. And that was because of the way my computer was processing it. If it was actually on a computer that met the requirements, like, you'd be able to go through this closing door and it'd be really dramatic and cool. And I think that is basically, in a nutshell, the kind of problems you can run into when you're trying to emulate older bits of kit sometimes when they're not running, say, on a CRT monitor and stuff like that.
It's a PS1 game. It's not as if it's like an Atari game. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I just think it's and it's very basic in so much that graphically, like, it looked up. They went for a certain style, and that was like paper cut 2D. You know, worse than South Park, or maybe on a par with early South Park animation. So I imagine that can't have been too difficult to port across. But then, I mean, I'm not a game developer, obviously, so I don't know. But then it just feels like there's not a lot of moving parts to the game. And the one thing that you have to be able to do is match a beat.
Time it right.
Yeah, exactly, time it. And to give you no inclination of how to do that, and just, you know, and have a random score going up and down in the bottom corner. And it's almost like, and just fuck you all out there that think that's a cool thing. Oh, Parappa the Rapper, I got nostalgia for it. Yeah, isn't it funny? Isn't it cool that it's a really difficult game and stuff? That's just not good gaming. That is just ridiculous gaming. And this was quite well reviewed when it came out. So, again, I can only reimagine that. Sorry, reimagine? I could imagine and reimagine and remaster in my mind that the PS1 game was better, like you say, than, you know, the PSP one, certainly. Because otherwise I just can't see how it possibly could have been well reviewed, really. It made me sad, this game. And I've played it a few times, like I say, in my life, and this was the saddest it made me, because I was critically thinking about it and thinking, you know, you are a shithouse of a game.
So, arbitrary score out of 10. Talking of random numbers going up and down.
But the problem is that the concept of the game and the storyline and stuff, the idea is great. You know, the idea
the window
of it,
dressing. Yeah, from what I remember, is great.
And you just think, and like, you want to play this game, you want to play it, but it's not very good. So, and the want of playing the game does come from within the game, if that makes sense. So it's almost like, as soon as you step into the menus,
it's charming.
The music's really good, and the characters. So it's difficult because I've played a lot of it, but I've not played a lot of it. But there's not a lot of it to play anyway. So probably a four maybe. That is in. I think 4 feels like the right place for me, in so much that it might be that I'm not very good at Parappa the Rapper, but. I'm, you know, 4, 3. Let's go 3, I think, because I've just complained about it the entire time. Yeah. But at the same time, it is playable, unlike The Sims 2 was. Like, so, do you know what I mean? Like, there is, you can play it, you just can't play it well. I really did believe for a while.
Well, you would, wouldn't you? Because it's cherished memories that they're digging up and selling you again. So let's talk about remakes and remasters, and, you know, what the fuck games industry and all that good stuff.
So should we start this with something that I found in Retro Gamer as late as Friday? So this is something that came from an article. And I'm going to read out on Retro Gamer, because fuck them, because we found out, you know, from this very copy, that we were talking last week, and we were talking about our favourite peripherals when we were at Slam Dunk, and lo and behold, someone must have been sleuthing upon us during a Billy Talent set. Why did you go see them? A Billy Talent set.
Feeding information to retro gamers journalists.
There must have been, because
I'm pretty sure the print dedeadline was probably weeks ago.
Yeah.
We love you guys.
And I'm really sorry. I shouldn't be slandering some. Can you give us some? Do we get free stuff from you, or do we give you free stuff? Do we send them hats now? I don't know.
Hats?
That is
send them an email.
Absolutely the title of this podcast. Hats? Question mark. Anyway, we do love retro game. It's just really funny, a bit of a quirk of fate that we were talking about that, and all of a sudden it was like, what? How?
Great minds.
Yeah, no, that's so weird. But then also with the fact that we were planning on talking about remasters and remakes, and then this article pops up where there is a remaster of a game that I have never heard of from a GameCube RPG, Baton Kaitos?
Baton, I think, yeah.
Baton. So, anyway, sounds like it's going to be great, probably. I don't know. Never heard the original game. So, but I just want to read out from the creator of the original game and the person who's actually, and they're going to port it over, a little excerpt from an article just to say what he thinks about remastering games is all about. So, we want to make them accessible not only to users who played the original ones, but also to new users. For this reason, we need to bring the graphics closer to expressions that suit the current era, and it is essential that the game is easily playable by new players through improving usability. I think it is very significant and important to make improvements in remastered games. We also feel that the ways to enjoy video games are becoming more and more diverse. So, there's somebody who is currently remastering one of their own games and their reasons behind it. Do we believe him?
Well, he's not going to sit there and go, well, there's money to be made, isn't there? Like, he's not going to say that. It's just a happy side effect. I think he's got a point. And I think he's got a couple of points. Personally, like, I think there's definitely something to be said for making older games more readily available and easily playable. And speaking as someone who has dabbled with collecting retro games, I would prefer a legitimate legal means to buy and play my games. And, as far as I'm concerned, in a perfect world, every console any manufacturer ever made would be backwards compatible with the ones before it, and all that kind of. Yeah. You would buy your Nintendo console, your Sony console, or whatever, and they would all play all of it, and everybody would be happy. Obviously, that's never going to happen because times change, technology changes, tastes change, and all that. So I think there's definitely something to be said for, particularly games that are beloved or rare or just getting crazy expensive to buy secondhand.
Yeah.
I think there is definitely something to be said for making those available on newer platforms so that you can just go and grab it, right? I also think, and his point there about enjoying games in a more diverse way, that's something I hadn't considered, because like including more accessibility options and things like that, again, very strong point.
You do see that a lot, actually, on remasters.
Yeah.
You bob in a menu and there's something that makes it more accessible to more people. That's fair.
And I think it's completely fair. And I think that actually kind of knocks one of the points I was going to make on the head quite nicely, because I was going to touch on remasters versus ports and things like that, and some of the shoot 'em ups that I've got. From a company called M2, where they've gone and basically ported some of these older games to modern consoles. They put a lot of stuff in to make the games easier to quote unquote read, so you know what's going on with your score or the resources you've got available or where you are in a level, or making it easier to play and learn, so you've got save states and things like that. That, in a nutshell, is all accessibility.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah,
I think.
True. Yeah.
So I think he's onto something with that.
Bemoaned, I guess, Parappa the Rapper feeling inaccessible almost
exactly.
in a way. So actually, if they give me a bit of a manual and said, "Oh, hit it in this certain way," then maybe you'd be like, "Well, at least I've tried."
Or even a slider, where you could adjust how lenient the timing was or not.
Yeah.
Something like that. There are ways of looking at video games in 2023 that wouldn't have occurred to people in 1997, and you might not even have been able to realistically implement for various reasons. So I think there's something there. That said, like it's very easy to point to like a kind of bad remaster or a remake and go like, well, that's completely betraying the original vision and stuff like that. And the one that comes to mind very, very quickly is the GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas remasters.
Yeah,
where like
I didn't play them all. Well, actually, I picked up San Andreas I think it was on Game Pass, and I've not really played it. I just kind of got it, but that I didn't get it on the back or like sort of on the strength of not, the bad reviews it got really.
And it's a weird one because like to play it, it controls better. Like they're modern controls.
Yeah.
See also the point about accessibility. But I think the big problem with it was the kind of the visuals, and it just went against the visual identity of the original games and things like that. And I think there's a lot to be said for trying to preserve that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that in those circumstances as well, it's almost like one of those things where you just think that Grand Theft Auto, as a specific example, because we've got that GTA 5 window is so open and long.
A big window.
Yeah, it's almost like, as in, I kind of give them a bit of a pass to say, well, actually, you are kind of trying to go back to your roots to sort of like, think, well, actually add to that and try and draw more fans into that window again. And it's almost like, so what am I trying to say there really? I think that they're trying to do something there where they're saying, oh, remember how good these games were and things for fans and stuff. But it sounds like they kind of ballsed it up a bit.
Yeah. And that goes back to, the source, because I think these were, the remastered versions were basically ports of the versions they put out on mobile and stuff like that, rather than the PS2 originals. And it's those sorts of things where you get into a lot of complexities very, very quickly. And I think it's something that a lot of companies would do well to bear in mind. I mean, my kind of issue is with things where, say, like The Witcher 3, where that seems to get a remaster constantly, but it's actually kind of a port and they're just polishing it up a little bit more and things like that. And that's where it starts to feel like a bit more of a cynical cash grab.
Yeah, and I get what you mean. Like The Witcher 3, like I've never played it, and I know everyone goes on and says it's one of the best games ever and things. But like, say, if a game was like, I'd say, how recent was that? When was it released?
Oh, flip, that's a question.
Just an estimate.
2018, probably earlier than that.
I mean, so say even if it was as early as 2015 and stuff, does a game in this day and age of that age need remastered, remade, retooled, or whatever it is? I mean, it's just like so. And this is what I was trying to get to really, as well with the question was, so my thought process, Tony Hawk 1 and 2, that for me was a really, really good remaster. Let's stop here.
Rather than a remake.
Yeah, well, we're not. Yeah, exactly. We've not addressed this yet, have we? So, as far as we're aware, then a remaster is adding in new concepts and ideas and maybe new levels and
polishing it.
Yeah, and giving you something more. Is that correct? Oh no, sorry, remaster. I've done it wrong, haven't I?
Yeah.
So remaster is actually a polish of the original game, visually mostly.
Yeah, sort of shinier graphics.
Yeah, and maybe like better sound and things. Whereas a remake, is where you would retool the game almost completely in a way that you'd still have the same vibe and maybe the same storyline, but you'd add new avenues to it and things. So Final Fantasy VII remake is, as it says in the title,
is a remake.
Yeah, is a remake. Whereas so you'd think maybe Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 is more of a remaster. They add a little bit in and shops and credits and stuff. But actually, if you want to just go for there is the two different versions, isn't there? But if you went for just the skater version, you can just go into all the levels and get all the goals, can't you? Is it the same thing?
I would say that Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 was a remake.
Okay.
Personally. And the main reason for that is that the manuals. I think it was the manuals or the reverts, one or the other. Like in fact, it might be both.
Yeah, it is. No, I forgot about that completely.
Like
you're right.
There was a mechanic that popped up in Tony Hawk's 3 that became like a core component.
It's the revert into manual.
The revert.
Yeah.
One of the core ways to make those big combos in a Tony Hawk's game. The quintessential way of chaining these things together didn't pop up in Tony Hawk 1 or 2. And that was kind of the big thing where they went back in and added that mechanic in.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. That is a correction I'm happy to accept. So that, say it is a remake anyway. And therefore, and I absolutely loved playing those remakes. But did I need them? And were they essential to do? Because Tony Hawk 1 and Tony Hawk 2, when I've been back to play Tony Hawk 2 on the PS2, just to have a little look at that and just get a feel, actually, for this question. Still have a fantastic time in that game. It still looks pretty good. The mechanics still work really well. And like you say, you can't do certain things that changed in the series, but that doesn't mean that doesn't have its own like sort of legitimacy in the first place. That is in, so it doesn't mean that wasn't a great game and isn't a great game. It's still a really good game. And therefore, coming back to the sort of arbitrary reviewing situation and stuff, that is in, so when we say Tony Hawk 2, Tony Hawk 3 is regularly up there in the top 10, 15, 20 games of PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2, etc. Like, then you go, well, where the remake is a completely different game, and it's almost like, you know, people kind of, you almost start to forget what the actual original game is. And you'll talk about preserving that game, but you're actually muddying the water. People will go back to that game and go, oh, it's shit because it hasn't got this mechanism in that I'm meant to have now. And it's like, well, no, but that's a different game. But then people won't think that way, I wouldn't think.
I think, for me, what constitutes a good remake is basically a kind of creation of the game you played according to your mind's eye.
Okay.
So, you know, when you think about playing Tony Hawk 1, you know, are you actually playing Tony Hawk 1 or are you actually playing Tony Hawk 3 and it looks like Tony Hawk 1? Because I know I am.
Yeah, well,
like,
you are.
As far as I am, like Tony Hawk 3 was the pinnacle and things like that. So I think a remake can tap into that. And the really good remakes will be able to successfully replicate that feeling. And so it's simultaneously, and this is the crucial bit for me, it's simultaneously old and new. Like it's got enough of the old stuff in to be like that kind of big reassuring blanket, but at the same time it's aware that it's bringing something new to the party, and that is what makes a good remake.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't think all of them necessarily always do that. And I think that there's more room in the industry for just having really good ports of old games, especially for, you know, genre classics, you know, like shmups or fighting games that haven't really changed a heck of a lot over the years. So like the Arcade Archives series on, I think it's Switch and PS4 or something like that, are a really good example of just bringing some of these, you know, some obscure, some really popular games, but just making them more available. I think there is absolutely a space for that, rather than just going off and remastering everything, or remaking everything, rather. Remastering, for me, God, this is getting complicated.
I know, I'm not going to lie, like, when we came into this pod, I thought, like, I was like, you know, I didn't really have an opinion per se on where we're going to end up here, but it's fucking complicated, isn't it?
It can
like,
be.
I've gone back on myself like 6 or 7 times here, and I'm like, oh wait, you know, what am I even saying now?
So like mid-sentence, my opinion is changing.
Great podcasting.
Absolutely. It's a voyage of discovery for everybody. So I think, where was I going with that? Oh yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Remastering, I think, is the one where it I mean, obviously, in this kind of way we're looking at it, falls into the middle ground anyway. I think it's where things get the murkiest and where it's also the least value it's bringing to things. So like, I think it's very easy to do a very lazy remaster and think it's great. You know, you could go back to like Game of the Year editions and stuff like that, where all the DLC's bundled up, but you could call it a remaster because you've changed a couple of color palettes or, you know, whatever. And I think that's the part of the sort of port, remaster, remake chain that I would remove. I would almost rather we have more ports and then wait, and then when you get to 10, 20 years down the line, if it warrants it, remake it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, the thing, like, one thing you'd miss out on, for example, though, like, so I'm thinking of a really good remaster was Halo. Like, getting the Master Chief Collection was that. I mean, that. So, for example, I mean, there are differences that you can make to that because you can add the, what were they called again? You could add like the different, not power-ups per se, but you could skulls. They're called that, yeah. And you can, make it do different things, and so you could change the level however you wanted in a way, and you could make the controls more friendly to be right. Halo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I play all these in the same way, but generally the main game. If you went back to play Halo 1, you were just playing a better looking Halo 1, and it just made me respect and think actually that game is just perfect how it was, and I don't feel like it needed too much more to it. So do I need a remake of Halo 1? No, I don't think I ever will. But a nice polished version of it, looking good and feeling like, like, wow, this looks brilliant, when you first land on that Halo ring, better than I remember, but still the same core game. I felt there's definitely room for that there.
I think like Halo could be an interesting one to look at one day, because correct me if I'm wrong, like the controls originally were quite modern, like forward looking for the time, but have basically since become almost like the standard.
Well, I mean, driving your Warthog with your analog stick was a brand new concept. I mean, if anything, that's not really sticked around.
But I'm thinking like the basics of moving and looking. Like where you have look on one stick and at the time, and this is me probably misremembering, right?
No, I think you're right.
Take say on the PS2 like Red Faction or something like that, you were still having to hold down a button to aim, and then it was like GoldenEye or something like that, right?
Time splitters, stuff like that,
exactly. And so I think that's probably why Halo gets away with the remaster treatment, because the guts are still quite modern
enough,
maybe, and I would have
Combat Evolved.
It is Combat Evolved. But I tell you what, if anybody out there wants to correct me on any of the timings of these games or whatever, like please do, because I am questioning everything I'm saying right now. But that, like, it seems to me like that is maybe the only kind of way that a kind of remaster might be acceptable. And like saying that, I guess you could extend it one step further, because we are neglecting PC in all this as well. And like, I mean, I could fire up my laptop and play like 1999 Unreal Tournament or the 2003 one or XYZ, and I think for backwards compatibility and getting things running and stuff like that, you've got to tip the cap to PC and like the not forgetting where you've come from, but at the same time having that kind of polish if you want it. I can see why that would be an attractive proposition on something like PC, whereas at the same time on consoles, or I guess PC, if you've got a desktop and you've got bits you can switch out and stuff like that, a lot of the time it feels like it's almost a driver for, like, remastering games is almost a driver for getting you to invest in new bits of kit.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, like, it's a weird one.
Speaking of which, then, I guess in a funny way, so I want to ask this last question, probably, but just because it was on my mind about the Resident Evil 4 remake, because obviously there are absolutely glowing reviews, and I'm kind of probably come back to the same point really that I was trying to make before. But so Resident Evil 4 was originally very well received as a reviewed game. The remake has been well received, and I've not played the remake, I'm going to be honest, but I guess asking the question then that. So it's probably a bit of a moot point, that is in a moot. Don't mute the podcast for the moot point. It was there a point in remaking an already very good game that probably would hold up today graphically for me, or is that just a cash grab? Or to make you play the PlayStation 5?
I think that's a difficult question, and I think
yes, it is.
I think they obviously made a point of remaking Resident Evil, like and doing sort of 2 and 3 and
what's the long game cash grab?
Properly dressing it up, right? I understand them remaking, say, Resident Evil 2, right? Because, going back to the PS1 version, it's difficult. So I get that. It's also been like absent from consoles for quite a while, whereas the Resident Evil like GameCube remaster, where they polished up the graphics, but it still played a little clunky.
Yeah.
Was still relatively available. Whereas Resident Evil 2 had kind of been sort of stuck on older consoles for a while, he says far too confidently for his own good. So I can kind of understand that remake, right? That to me is a sizable gap. It's warranted. If you're bringing the story in some way, shape or form to modern consoles, you may as well give it a spit and polish. Right? I understand that. Resident Evil 4 was readily available, had been ported to basically everything. I don't think a remake was necessarily warranted, but I can kind of see where it came from. I can imagine that, say, someone at Capcom was looking at the sales figures for the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 and were like, oh, hey, we're actually getting some new fans on board.
Yeah.
They're going to want number 4. And the reason I'm sort of stalling for time a little bit is because despite all that, I really, really, really want to fucking play the VR version of Resident Evil 4. I really want to. Like, I think that kind of... I don't know. I guess it's not a remake, is it? So I guess a remaster. But they're adding that whole new functionality, that whole new way of playing it.
Yeah.
So I guess arguably it could be a remake of sorts. It just, doesn't necessarily look quite as polished as something else might.
I mean, I'm asking these questions just to probe it. Like, for example, and I'm going to say this now, who gives a fuck if you're having fun playing video games? It doesn't matter. I mean, loads of people love this new game.
Yeah.
I'm going to invert comma, new game, but everybody, from what I can see, a lot of people love this new game. So it doesn't actually really matter. Like, if a business is making money from something and people are enjoying it, what's it actually matter? It doesn't. It's just almost, I like to ask the question that, is it necessary? And does it, and I'm kind of a little bit concerned that you kind of forget a little bit, like I said, a little bit murky with the previous game. It's almost like your brain just starts to go, well, this is the game now, and it's like, this is the master version of this, and it's like, but is it really?
I mean, a couple of the things with the Resident Evil 4 remake that I saw in reviews, I think Retro Gamer made this point actually, was the jump between the original Resident Evil 2 and the remake and 3 and the remake was big, right?
Significant enough.
Resident Evil 4 still holds up. Sure, it might not be like a 2023 standard on a few fronts, but by and large, kind of like what you were saying with Halo, it holds up. And I think increasingly that is going to have to be a question that is asked seriously before anybody it just wades in to remake it. Because if it's still holding up, do you really need to remake it from the ground up, or can you save yourself a lot of effort and just polish it a little bit and trot it out the door? But then
is it a time thing then? Are we saying then where we're just
Maybe,
coming down to it has
maybe.
to I mean, maybe for our own opinion, has to have been 20 years since that game's out, because it has to be a few consoles difference, because there has to be enough of a difference to say, well, why would you do it? I mean, I've got a real problem with the DC universe in films and things, because it's like
just constantly rebooting.
Yeah, no, and I'm like, how many Suicide Squads are there and stuff? And I'm like, I've only just swallowed that pill. I mean, sorry, like I'm not. I mean, I'm saying that about DC. How many Spider-Mans have there been? You know what I mean? Like Marvel, yeah. And it's like everyone's like, oh, this Spider-Man's really, really good now and stuff. And I'm like, fucking hell, so much Spider-Man. Although saying that, can't wait to see Into the Spider-Verse. But then I feel like that's like a different concept. But it's just like, it's like, man, like, like rebooting so quickly something, or effectively remaking even as well. It just feels like it's just, I'm like, I need some time.
I've just bought that.
Yeah.
Are you telling me you had that little faith in what you put out that you feel the need to redo this soon?
Yeah.
Like,
it was so good, I'm going to make some more money for it.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Like, it's a fine line, because it can feel like a cynical cash grab, or it can feel like they're somehow embarrassed by the original version or something like that. And I think it's an interesting topic to probe, and especially if you start pairing it with, the video games as art arguments and things like that. And like, I can imagine that your kind of video games auteurs, there might be some people who would be like, well, I didn't quite achieve what I set out to do with this piece of work, but I've cracked how to do it now, so I'm going to put it out again. Or you might have some that would be perfectly willing to sit there and go, no, the original version is the version, you play that, warts and all, and that's what you're getting. And it's a very fine line to decide when this is and isn't appropriate, but so often it can feel like a bit of a grubby cash grab. But at the same time, it's a great way of playing games and versions of games that you would never have been able to get hold of.
Look, I'm talking out of two sides of my mouth here.
Absolutely.
I said last week I was excited to play the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. You know what I mean? Like, isn't that feels like it actually... I mean, it's a bit further back. It's that sort of, PS2 situation stuff, but it's that is like there or thereabouts, where actually is that not like... And then actually they've had a HD version of that as well.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you what, so here's a question that I'm kind of forming while I'm trying to talk, so it's going to come out bad. But like, is there... it seems to me that there's a bit of a correlation between the games that were, when they first came out, revered as, genre defining or classics or, seminal works, and remaking them. Would it make more sense to remake some of the lesser known,
some of the shitty games,
more shitty games, rather than the classics?
Yeah.
And like, so why do we feel the need to tinker with what is, deemed maybe not perfection, but a towering piece of work? Why do we do that? Why don't we do it with books or films as much and stuff like that? I mean, I guess to some extent we do, right? People are rewriting stuff all the time for parody or otherwise, but like, it just seems like games are falling into a strange little niche.
Yeah, I almost feels like that. I do feel myself recoiling away from things that I'm like, that was already good. Like, why? And already good and recent. Why do I need it again? I'm very wary of it. And almost even with that, whilst I said I was really excited about seeing the Metal Gear Solid 3 remaster, remake, is it? Remake, isn't it?
Remake.
Yeah, Delta it's called, isn't it? And I will get that game, I think. Or will I? I don't even... Do you know what? I'm saying that like I will. Depends how much they're going to charge me for it, which will be full whack, and I'll probably therefore go, actually...
70 quid.
Yeah, and I will go, that's too much money for me. So I'm saying that. I think I would want that game. And I feel like that's probably been long enough for it to be a bit of a remake. But saying that, though, I went back and just played the first half an hour of the tanker level on Metal Gear Solid 2, the HD version that they brought out for the Xbox 360. And it's good. And that's what had me thinking there. And then I was thinking, well, actually, Metal Gear Solid 3 HD will actually be even a little bit better than this. And I've seen so many sort of cutscenes of it recently because it's so in the news and stuff. And I'm like, this game still looks pretty good now. Like, do I actually need to pay another 50, 60 quid for something that is probably going to be very similar to what this is? And I'm going to be like, oh, all high and mighty about it. I probably will, but I do feel a bit odd about it.
Yeah, and especially like Metal Gear Solid's a good one, because like me going back to what I was saying about auteurs and stuff like that earlier, like Hideo Kojima, as far as I'm aware, is not attached to the remake.
No.
So like,
and there's a lot of people.
Is that going to lose something?
There's one of those memes that where it's like basically someone's playing a game and someone's shouting over their ear, and it's like, oh, Kojima's not even in the game, and then it's like, and it says something else, and then they just say, oh, stop having fun, and it's like, so I don't want to be that guy. I'd just like to ask the question about, is it the right thing to be doing with something like you said? It probably is worth thinking, if something was so good in the first place and actually it's still playable, why are you remaking it? make the right decision and decide is it definitely for the right reasons.
Actually, that's a good point. It's deciding for the right reasons, but I also think I wonder if there's something to be said for getting to the stage where someone can settle down and go no, this is the definitive version. That's what I mean. They put out 5 edits of Blade Runner or something like that, before Ridley Scott was no, this one. This is the one. With some of these remakes and stuff like that, we're only on a couple of remakes in for some of them. So, fair cop, I suppose.
That would be incredible. It's
5 versions of Metal Gear Solid 3.
Resident Evil 4 remake.
So here's one for you as well. Just I'm very aware this is dragging on, but just thinking about it, because it is a fascinating topic though. Because I know when we did the Slam Dunk thing, we were doing favourite games and stuff like that, and I said about Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo rather, and I was sitting here thinking oh yeah, but they only ever port that. That's not true. Because on the Xbox 360 they did the HD remake, which is a remaster by our rules here, because they redid all the artwork and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you could switch it back, but still, and it had a bunch of accessibility options in it and ways that you could learn the game and things like that. Crucially, that's kind of served the backbone for a version on Switch. But apart from that, it's not the version that always pops up. The original one has been ported more since that remaster came out.
That's weird, isn't it?
What's the deal with that? Did they realise that the definitive version was the original one or something?
That's interesting, isn't it? Because is that just the type of game it is, maybe?
Well, as an arcade thing, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's just a type of game situation. I like that. I like that you thought about that, though. That's cool.
But I mean, the version on Switch includes new characters as well. Not completely new, mind, but enough that it is different. But it's got the artwork from the remaster, so it's almost like a remaster of a remaster, and yet they're still porting the original as well.
Yeah. Do you remember? This is a different question as well. But do you remember last week where I asked and said to Liam is in is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate
the ultimate one?
The ultimate one, yeah. Isn't that? Obviously, he said he hadn't really played it, but that's interesting as well. Obviously, every time you get a new Nintendo, you get a new Smash Bros, and it's which Smash Bros is the good Smash Bros, and it's a lot of people. Which one was that one for then?
Hopefully it was the GameCube, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
But I mean, I guess if they make another one, where do you go from Ultimate? What? More Ultimate? Ultimatera?
Super Smash Bros.
Hyper Ultimate.
Yeah.
Super cool.
And I think that's probably a good place to leave our Hyper Ultimate Super Cool pod. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Classic. Obscured. Controls. Multiplayer. Simple. Twin stick. Boom. Tate. Trackball. Fine. Snaky. Steering. Tabletop. Crash. Globes. Steering. Tabletop. Read those bits. Throttle. Cinematic. WTF. Leggy. Twitchy. Spin out. Slightly. I'm going to have to start again.
No, we're leaving it there. That's fine. Thank you. It's like the shipping forecast.